It was the summer of 1980. I'm about to start my senior year of high school, and I'm collecting unemployment. Closest I ever got to getting an allowance. Free money! Sweet! I set ridiculous parameters on my job search because, well, free money. I would only take something related to electronics, and nothing under $7 an hour. That's about $14 an hour in today's dollars. But that darn state unemployment department went and found me a job that met all of my ridiculous parameters, a really good job. It was as a video game repairman at the second or third Chuck E. Cheese they ever built in Redwood City, a suburb of San Francisco. The playwright Anton Chekhov once wrote, and I'm paraphrasing here, that if your story has a gun in the first act, somebody better get shot by the third act. In that spirit, I will mention this place was located right next to the 101 freeway and just a couple of blocks from the California Highway Patrol's headquarters for the county. I was hired as a junior video game technician. The senior technician, aka my boss, was Mike, a guy about a decade older than me, who had been drafted right out of high school and sent to fight in Vietnam. He came back from there with a wife, a horrible case of PTSD, and a really bad drinking problem. He was the sweetest, most gentle person you could ever hope to meet. We'd have long chats about gadgets we'd love to invent. Then he'd go out to his car and get loaded. I tried to keep an eye on the schedule, and if he was supposed to be working and I wasn't busy, I'd run out of the restaurant and punch his time card in and out to cover for him. I freaking loved that guy, and I covered for him as best I could, and he knew it. Rounding out our cast of characters was a general manager, a skinny, high-strung guy named Eric, and Eric was a great boss. Not so much in terms of actually managing, but in terms of spending all his time holed up in his office doing what I can only assume were massive amounts of cocaine. Every now and then he'd emerge, sniffling and looking completely tweaked out, tell everyone to keep working, and then back to his sniffle cave. I liked Eric. I was supposed to repair any stuff that broke, video games, skee-ball, whatever, but everything was brand new, so I'd drag a game into our little repair room, grab some lousy pizza and a pitcher of draft beer, and drink beer and play video games for hours. I remember thinking how people are always complaining about having to go to work, but it seemed to me that going to work was awesome. I mean, yeah, the pizza sucked, and sometimes the grunts in the kitchen were slow to get a kid changed, but I was willing to endure such hardships for a paycheck. At Chuck E.'s there are, of course, employees who put on costumes to dance around and entertain the kids. I was obviously not one of them. Here's where our trouble starts. But after a few pitchers of cheap beer, it seemed like a good idea to put on one of the costumes. I selected Mr. Munch, a generic little monster covered in purple fur. I put it on, I walk out, and a little kid start running up to me, and I'm mostly just annoyed. I've never really liked small children. So drunk 16-year-old me decides to walk outside to lose the kids. As I said earlier, the place was in Redwood City along the 101 freeway. I don't actually remember climbing the fence, but I definitely must have because I remember walking along the side of the freeway, drunk, dressed in a purple furry costume, waving at the cars. And I definitely remember the two fine officers of the California Highway Patrol who picked me up along the side of the freeway. It was my first time in the back of a cop car. My first time talking to the cops while completely drunk, but, spoiler alert, definitely not my last. And the two cops thought it was all pretty funny. They kept going on and on about how epic the firing I was going to be, how I was about to get fired like a vase in a kiln, and they were wondering if my boss would actually be screaming at me, and so on. I'm so drunk, I'm laughing along with them, saying, "Guess we'll see, guys." We get back to the restaurant. They send the poor kid at the door to get Eric from his virtual vacation in Colombia. Eric comes out. He's rubbing his nose and sniffling. "Okay, Ron, go put the costume away and get back to work." Then he turns around and goes back inside. Those poor cops, they look so disappointed, so shocked, so let down. I almost felt bad for them. Almost. I turned to the cops and in a cheery voice said, "Thanks for the ride, guys. Keep up the good work." Not 10 minutes later, I'm back in my little repair room upstairs, playing Defender and sipping a cold beer. But that's just part 1 of the Chuck E. Chronicles. In part 2, it gets kind of weird and stabby. So to recap, I'm in high school working at Chuck E. Cheese, and at this point, we're readying the place to open. I assume you've been to a Chuck E. Cheese, everyone has, so you know the animatronic characters on the stage at the front of the dining room. They come as a kit. It's air compressors, computer pressurizes a hose to move a limb or a jaw, etc. Mike, my boss, is drunk, there's a shocker, and he looks at the kid and says, "This is all wrong. I can make this much better." I said, "Mike, it's a kit. I think we just put it together as it is." He says, "No, I'll make it much better." And he makes out a list of aircraft-grade compressors, hoses, fittings, clamps, and a lot of other stuff that I have no idea what it is. I go to Eric, the cokehead general manager, and he says, "Do whatever Mike says." And he pulls out the store checkbook, signs a blank check, and hands it to me. Okay, 16-year-old me goes and gets this stuff from an industrial supply place. We bolt it all up. The air pressure is ridiculously high. The characters are whipping around like they're on meth. I said, "This looks wrong." Drunk Mike says, "It's perfect." Cokehead Eric says, "I'll be in my office." Okay. The restaurant opens, and one fine day about 3 weeks later, we hear screaming and crying. Turns out the air pressure kept whipping some character around so hard the bolts on her arm got loosened and the arm flew off. By some miracle, it didn't kill a kid. It landed in the middle of a children's birthday party. I'm told the kids started crying, and like ripples in a pond, the crying spread throughout all the children. So there's about 60 crying children and a dozen angry moms. Mike and I walk down, we stand at the doorway, and we just stare in silence for a long time. I'm not going to say a thing. He finally says, "Maybe the pressure is too high." I said, "I saved all the original parts. They're in the storage shed in the parking lot. We can just put them on." Mike says, "Nah, that's too much work." Mike was my kind of boss. He told me to sharpen a screwdriver. Finally, it turns out something I learned in my lousy high school comes in handy. While about 60 crying children watched, I started stabbing holes in the air hoses with a sharpened screwdriver to reduce the air pressure, mostly at the back of the characters where the hoses went in. I heard a couple of children ask their mothers, "Mommy, why is that man hurting Chuck E. Cheese?" I'm pretty sure I put a lot of kids into therapy years later. When we got done, it was probably the most work I'd ever done on that cool job. So we grabbed a pitcher of cheap beer and went upstairs to play some video games. I was in high school, and at the time, I thought all jobs would be that much fun. Turns out, I was wrong. And that's Storytime with Uncle Ron. On our next episode, I save 2 women who try to steal a souvenir of our weekend together. I keep them from going to jail, and then I steal the souvenir myself. Remember to hit like and subscribe so you'll never miss an episode of Storytime with Uncle Ron.